Q&A.
Hey, how are you? I missed
Good,
part
how
of
are
what
you?
you said. I just got access to the audio.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Just in time.
There you go.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Let me give an introduction to you, and then we can get into some questions. So Jeff is the former Chief Marketing Officer of Shopify, where he oversaw global marketing, including growth, brand, communications, product marketing, strategy and operations, and creative teams. Previously served as the Chief Marketing Officer at Shutterstock, held multiple senior level positions with Beachbody, including also strategy and analytics roles at SGN, MySpace, and Yahoo. I made it through, I think, 6 weeks of P90X before capitulating. But then in COVID, I found the wait side bot for them in my basement, and so it's turned out to be a long tail kind of value driver for me.
Yeah, it's amazing. No matter what I do in my career or in my life, P90X is always the thing that people get excited about, and I feel like the real renaissance moment for home fitness during COVID.
Yeah, I'm sure he's doing well. Wasn't Tony? Is that the
Tony Horton?
Yeah, Tony Horton. Awesome.
Great trainer.
So Jeff, thank you for being here. As you know, this conference is meant to introduce brands and retailers to the e-commerce tools and platforms that are shaping the future of e-commerce, and can help them better reach, engage, and sell to their customers. So everybody from TikTok and Cameo on discovery to Roadie on fulfillment, and everything in between. So given your experiences, would love to dig into some of your thoughts on e-commerce and then also online marketing. Maybe we could start with the obvious question, which is that you've seen a spike in e-commerce penetration post-COVID, not evenly distributed, of course, but people are moving their purchases online, which means there's probably a permanent impact offline with bricks and mortar, which has been the largest channel for most people, period. What role do you think e-commerce should play for big brands and retailers going forward?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. I think you're right that e-commerce has obviously become more of a thing over the last few months, but I look at that as mostly accelerating a trend that was going to happen anyway. Much has been made of the fact that 85% of sales still occur in the offline realm, which means there's a lot of secular growth ahead of us for e-commerce. But even if you look before COVID and you take those 85% of sales that were happening offline, 65% of them were influenced by online touch points somewhere along the way. So similar to what you have in the world of digital marketing, there's a little bit of an attribution question, where you have the cash register in one place, online or offline, but there's an interaction effect between the environments. All that said, the shift towards e-commerce is accelerating. I don't know that post-COVID we stay at the exact elevated level we're at right now, but some of the acceleration is here to stay. And I think that we see a rush of offline brands trying to figure out their e-commerce strategies.
From a bricks and mortar perspective, you mentioned that 65% of sales are influenced by online. What's the role you think of bricks and mortar in the future?
Yeah, brick and mortar is getting hurt. That was going to happen anyway. And I think what you're seeing is that you have a consumer who's been educated now by an online environment and is forcing offline retailers to adapt. So, you can't anymore take a customer who's really in it for buying and force them into shopping. That was an old retail trick. You would say oh, I'm going to put the thing you really want in the back corner of the store. You'll have to walk past everything else and you'll have additional impulse purchases. The online customer doesn't tolerate that now, and you see retailers adapting. In some cases, you see now a cooler in the front of the store with the cold beverage you actually want. You see retailers, starting to try to create more frictionless environments with self-checkout and buy online and pick up in store. There's a much higher burden on customer service because of what you can avail yourself of online from an information perspective. And so, I think retail is adapting, but I think it's got a challenging road ahead.
And then you mentioned how there's a rush online. Most of these companies are online already, but it's a small part of their sales. Most of their sales coming through traditional offline channels. What can some of these big brands for whom e-commerce is not in their DNA, what can they learn from smaller brands? And specifically, any thoughts from your experience at Shopify, where the business was built on the back of small merchants?
Yeah, we saw a lot, and again, this is also post-COVID only being accelerated, but we saw a lot at Shopify of larger incumbent brands taking up the mindset, like, we've been disrupted one too many times, and we don't want to have to go out and buy that company that disrupted us for $1 billion again, and so we're going to seek to disrupt ourselves internally. And part of the way they went after that was, yes, to adopt the tools of the disruptor, and Shopify, and especially in this case, Shopify Plus, was a key component of that. But they also try to take on the mindset of the disruptor. And so, the drive towards Shopify was in part to try to get out of that 3-year technology queue to get your piece of software built. If you wanted to launch a direct-to-consumer experiment, you did it with Shopify, the CMO, not the CTO, could get an experiment in market very, very quickly. So, speed to market, certainly a value of the smaller merchants that the bigger companies are and we're starting to adopt. Certainly data centricity, understanding who the customer is, what they might need next, and serving them up the relevant piece of information or cross-sell. And I think also sort of the assumption that, getting rid of the assumption that once you have a customer, you own them for life. The digital native smaller brands know that you have to win each and every interaction with the customer. And that's why they're in sort of a 24/7 omni-channel world of posting to social and sending out emails and, just being sort of ever present in the customer's life. I think those are some of the things, sort of the speed, the data, the knowledge of the customer, and winning every interaction, to summarize, that the bigger brands are learning from the smaller
And then from
guys.
a data perspective, most big brands, because they sell through other channels who own the data on the customer, don't have great data on their customers. So what's the first thing they can do to start getting smart about data?
Yeah, I think people sort of freak out when they hear data and they assume that they need all sorts of complex analyses. Really, the most important thing, I think, to get started with anything data related is to make sure you're capturing the right and basic customer attributes, that you're governing them well, so we all have the same definition of what a metric means, because otherwise you get sort of the garbage in, garbage out thing, where everyone's looking at a different number for customer count or a different number for revenue. Was it gross or net of shipping and handling, things like that. So I just think really clean, well captured and well governed data at the customer level that folks can access is really the start. People do get into more sophisticated modeling. Your cross-sell program should eventually density for which items of cross adoption, but that stuff comes down the road. Just, really basic questions of which media channels are working? Is there an ROI on our paid spend? Basic stuff like that. I think is really where.
So let's say I'm a marketer and I don't have clean data, or I don't know I have clean data. Where do I start? And what are some tools that I can use to, most effectively clean my data and then make it good data?
Yeah, I think that the notion of data cleansing from a source system, into the hands of a marketer or a salesperson or someone who's not themselves, a database administrator or data science, that's not really something a layperson is going to do. But I think that, if you can use Google Analytics for free and get, a bunch of basically clean data, there's always going to be some error rate in data that's captured online. But within normal tolerances, I think that you can, pretty easily tag and capture data on your website in an e-commerce environment. For more sophisticated customer metrics that integrate order management and web behavioral type stuff, and maybe start to bring in third-party data, you are going to need a team of BI folks to help you. But there's basic data you can capture on your own.
Got it. And I guess kind of building on that, best in class technologies that brands, should be looking at? Like, are there, particular customer data platforms that you think, and maybe it depends on who you are and the type of product you sell or your scale, but, where does one begin to look for those kind of tools?
Yeah, I mean, I always think you sort of start simple. Like I've actually gone through and made lists of like what solutions I think you would need to have a fully functioning MarTech and e-commerce stack. And you might end up having like 10 or 20 of them. But you can start pretty simple. Like even within Shopify in the last year, we launched, an email tool, right? Like, sometimes the hardest sale to win is the first one. Are you sending your customers emails? Are you, giving them offers and discounts? But, you can end up getting fairly complex. You might have a testing tool and a bid management tool and an analytics tool. And, one I'm really excited about these days is the customer data platform. It used to be that if you wanted to, communicate with your existing customers, maybe send them an email to drive cross-sell, the marketer would have to go to a data analyst and say like, hey, pull me a list and I'm going to give you some criteria. Everyone who's spent more than $100 and opened an email in the last 3 months. And then the list comes back and you go, that list isn't big enough. Maybe everyone who spent over $50, and you sort of have to go back and forth. Now you're using expensive data science resources to basically query database and pull out lists. The customer data platform, the one that I've used, is called Action IQ. Basically sits on top of a repository of customer information and lets a marketer drag and drop attributes like the one I described to create a list. They can see the size of the list on the fly, modify it as needed, and then once you've got the final list for your campaign, you can basically schedule all the campaign points through the customer data platform. So maybe send an email to this list, and for everyone who opens it but doesn't convert, run a custom audience on Facebook 3 days later. And so, in terms of empowering marketers and putting the data in their hands, I think the CDP or customer data platform is a good new tool. But you can end up with fairly complex stacks depending on.
Right. Are there any parts of the stack that you should own?
I'm not a big believer in building your marketing tech stack in-house. You get that a lot in tech companies that sort of regard third-party solutions with suspicion and believe that because we can build something and have the engineering talent to do so, right, then we should. The problem with that is you're typically redeploying resources that could be building customer-facing features, on internal enterprise systems, when there's probably a perfectly good company that focuses on that and only that. And you can end up boxing yourself into a corner where down the road, you might want that piece of enterprise tooling to interact with some other piece of software you acquire. Right. But because you built everything in-house, you've got to do that until the end of time. And so there's, reasonable skepticism of technology vendors that come in and try to sell you the world. Some of the big cloud solutions have frankly disappointed me by trying to sell me way more. Solutions are themselves made up of a series of acquisitions. They might not even be that well integrated with themselves, so to speak. But I also think that assuming you've got to build everything yourself because you can is dangerous.
We talked about data. If you're a marketer online today, outside of data, what's your biggest challenge, do you think?
I think it's the Facebook Google duopoly. Something like the number I have in my head is 60%, but it may be more of online spend goes to just those two channels. And because they're essentially bidded marketplaces, the cost for each click, and therefore the cost of acquiring each customer, goes up every year, probably in the neighborhood of 10 to 25%. And so if you've got a scaling company, you've got two challenges there. One is you've either got to continue to grow lifetime value just to keep up with the growing cost of acquisition to keep your margin structure in place. The other is that one day you could run out of growing room. One of the things I worried about a great deal in some of my CMO roles was that as we spent up and up and up in the same handful of channels, that like one day we'd wake up and there'd be no more search terms left, and Google AdWords would have then sort of capped our company's growth. And so I think you gotta, in the digital environment, work like hell to develop and test into new channels that will have a return on them, so you don't get stuck in that duopoly. That's one of the big concerns I think you worry about.
Questions following up on that. The first is, so if you're using AdWords or Facebook ads, you're going to be subject to increasing CAC, which is absent you figuring out how to drive higher LTV is going to really mess with your economics. So where do you go? So one place people have gone is offline. You talk a little bit about the arbitrage opportunity, so to speak, that existed, between like online and offline.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. I think there is sort of now an arbitrage opportunity where folks have been so focused on the data in online channels that they've essentially come to do two things. One is prioritize efficiency over efficacy. So we might be restructuring our AdWords accounts every few weeks to get our CAC down, but there may be an entire body of orders we're leaving on the table that are at a higher CAC, but still a very profitable one, and we're missing out on them entirely. So you sort of have this idea of efficiency at the expense of efficacy, which is dangerous to a marketing program. The other thing I think people have come to do is to feel so much pressure to have an exact measurement that they essentially pay a measurement premium and will pay more than the value of an ad is worth online for the sort of right and ability to say they knew exactly what it did and what it was worth. And so, I think that people might be walking away from notions of direct attribution, like we're going to say exactly which touch point in the customer's path to purchase was responsible for how much of the order, and moving back towards what was popular like in the 1970s, which were media mix models, where you say, okay, I can't tell you which touch point, which order, but I know that when radio is high in my mix, I get a lot of orders in aggregate. I don't necessarily need to know which ones. And so, I think that's one trend you might see, people walking away from the sort of the great hype around attribution and that we would perfectly solve it that we saw a few years ago. And I think the other is that you're starting to see the availability of programmatic inventory in traditional offline channels. So there are now, billboard units you can buy that are essentially mapped to the demographics of the folks, who will be driving on the road past that billboard. And so I think the rise of programmatic, but outside of the sort of, display context.
You think that premium is a function of the relative inexperience of people who kind of hold the purse strings with respect to more traditional advertising? Like, so these weren't the people buying, ads on Friends, or, a sponsorship at a amphitheater. They're the ones who grew up buying Facebook ads, and like that is all they know, or are there other reasons why people?
Yeah, I think that's one reason. I think, and by the way, I wouldn't just put it on the marketers themselves, by a finance person or other parts of the organization. And so there's a great pressure for marketing these days to be able to demonstrate that what they're doing works. And they don't want marketing spend to be viewed as sort of the discretionary thing that we cut as soon as we get into a moment of uncertainty, like in a pandemic, for example. They want to be able to sort of dispositively establish that this works. And so I think that's, that's sort of a reality of being a marketer in the digital era. But I think, I think there are other factors too. And one of them is really sort of, what I would call short-termism, which is, wanting to see the result immediately. I've sort of argued against a perfect one-to-one matching of, digital advertising means, performance marketing, and offline advertising means brand marketing. But there's some loose associations between the role of the funnel and the medium, where offline media tends to be more upper funnel and awareness generating. And the reality is that takes longer to work. And you might find that 3 years out, you don't have any more digital intent to harvest, which is really the goal of bottom funnel performance marketing. But I think there's also just the dual imperatives to show, one, that the money's going somewhere valuable and that it works immediately, I think is driving a lot of that measurement.
And then like speaking about like kind of top and bottom of the funnel, how does one balance brand marketing versus performance marketing? It feels like the pendulum can kind of swing back and forth, but is there science around I should be spending this much here and that much there? How do you think about it?
I think the answer is yes and no. One of the things I remind people a lot is that so the pendulum swings. You're right. We're right now in a moment of a sort of extreme pendulum swing towards digital performance marketing. I worry about that, and I said that a moment ago. But one thing I tell people is people don't act on impulse in higher consideration purchase environments, and you do need to seed awareness over time. And if we could make brand marketing perfectly measurable, it wouldn't be brand marketing, it would be performance marketing. And so, I like to remind people, like, I can't turn brand marketing into performance marketing. Now, I do believe in, illustrating what the effect could be. So if I'm trying to persuade, a CFO why we should invest in brand marketing, I will build models that show a halo effect on our performance marketing funnels in the out years. Maybe, we get more of our searches come in branded search versus unbranded search. Maybe when people hit our page, they convert at a higher rate because we've built a brand halo. But when that moment comes in the future, you won't be able to say exactly which lift in conversion rate or how much of it came from the fact that you've built a brand. And so I do think there's a role for doing some of that on faith. Now, anyone can fund performance marketing that has a demonstrable ROI until they're blue in the face. Like, what moron wouldn't do that, right? But at the same time, we'd be remiss not to admit that there are many great brands that have been built on the back of brand marketing exclusively. So, certainly the evidence is out.
And then, going back to kind of where to go outside of Facebook and Google, how do you think about approaching and testing new channels like TikTok and Cameo, who are two companies that have one is presented and one is presenting in the afternoon? These are new channels. One is very large, one is growing very fast. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I referred to this a little bit earlier, which is sort of the great drive to uncover new channels that perform. And so, I've always been a big believer in test everything, especially if you think that it will eventually have scale behind it. So like, any marketing program you're running, you should probably be carving out 10 to 20% at least of the spend for experimentation with new channels. Because, if you hit on one, if you, make TikTok pay out for you, that's going to have tremendous scale behind it. And it might be your next AdWords or Facebook. So you certainly got to be experimenting with them. But the other thing to make sure of is like the role of creative still, creative still matters. And you have to be idiomatically appropriate on the platforms, right? Like a TikTok experience should not feel like a Facebook experience. And so what I have seen people do is sort of run the wrong creative or the wrong creative match for a given platform, not get the results they want, and then sort of, in a false negative kind of way, conclude that the platform is useless. It may take some time to crack the code, but, I agree with you. I think TikTok is one people are going to have to, figure out how to skin. I think a lot of marketers are going to be trying Pinterest. It's sort of the next forum where they've started to build out, tools for monetization of their ad platform, and I think that's
interesting. Don't really talk about Pinterest that much anymore, but maybe I'm just not in the right conversations. It's obviously a big platform.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit. I think with Pinterest is a little bit of a wait and see, but a lot of marketers who engage with the ad providers will tell you that they've sort of stepped up their game in the last few years in terms of building the tooling you would want from an ad platform perspective. And, there's good reason to believe that you have consumers on Pinterest in a sort of aspirational mindset of the things that they want. That's very easy to believe. So I don't know that anyone's quite cracked the code yet. It's a little bit of a wait and see, but the dollars eventually have to go somewhere else because you run out of scale and or the costs just get to be too much. And so that's one of the channels that I've bet on. And then you've got other things out there. You've got Reddit and Quora and smaller ones that when you add them up, aggregate.
Is it on the platform to educate potential advertisers on how to best to use it? I mean, I don't feel like maybe I was not the right customer, but I don't feel like AdWords really showed me what to do, or Facebook really shows me how to best use the platform. But should new platforms like TikTok or Cameo or even Pinterest, educate people on the right kind of creative, ethos, or ethic, to make sure that they're not putting something on that platform that looks like another platform?
Yeah, I would just say you were in the wrong segments too. I think that for these companies, if that's how they make money, then it behooves them to educate the buyer. And so I would argue that if you were to go inside Google's ad sales, they have a very sort of sophisticated way of looking at who's SMB, who's large enterprise, and if you're spending enough money on Google, you might have 3 to 5 folks working only on your account and helping you with that creative execution and helping you with your bid strategy. So is it incumbent upon them to help you? I guess only if they want you to spend money on it. But I found that in practice they do.
I guess I got to get my revenues up. What do you think about SMS and chat as a platform?
Yeah.
Or as a channel?
I think that as a consumer, I haven't, as a marketer, we were just starting to implement that at Shopify. So as a marketer, I only have so much experience with SMS. But as a consumer, I'm starting to see folks use it well. Certainly on the D2C e-commerce side, you're getting a discount for signing up for text, and then they'll never leave you alone until the end of time. But I think it's effective. And then I've always been a fan of chat, both reactive and proactive. Meaning, you're on someone's landing page and you see the chat box pops up and, you're offered to answer a question. The thing I'll say about that is if you were to, do proactive chat and use the technology and an expensive customer service person's time indiscriminately, you would not find an ROI on that. But if you're using chat in the context of something predictive, someone who's, hit the pricing page a couple of times and that, triggers the launch of the chat window, or there's some other data source being brought to bear, and you're launching the proactive chat in a small number of cases that are high probability to need help converting, that can be very effective. And I've implemented proactive chat programs in a couple different
Jeff, well, thank you so much for being here. Good to see you, and appreciate your time, appreciate your insights, and have a great day. Awesome, Jeff. Take it easy.
All right. Thanks for having me, Stu.